James Galway first put a flute to his lips, it was in a band in Belfast. He's since moved on. Jackie Coulter has stayed in town, playing in the Shankill flute bands he's grown up with. It's a world that James Galway remembers well.
You have to play these pieces like you've been playing them all your life, and of course I have as a child. When I grew up in Belfast, we used to play all sorts of things on the flute. I used to play in a flute band, and we used to play Beethoven's Fifth Symphony for 33 flutes and drums and triangle. Well, I got very used to playing things on the flute, and as a matter of fact, when I heard for the first time the Jupiter Symphony played by an orchestra, I thought, there's no way Mozart should have definitely wrote this piece for 33 flutes.
Jackie, what do you think of James Galway?
Well, for a man that came from Belfast and the same kind of a background as I did, and to go on to be the world's greatest fluter, I think it's magnificent.
Well, what does the flute music mean to you?
Well, it's been in my blood ever since I was young, you know. It's only bondsmen can understand what I'm talking about. You get that wee flutter in the heart and you pick up on and you go into that bond, and once you get there, it's unbelievable, it's great.
What's it like when you're out on the march?
It's competition, that's all it is. It's all competition, especially Blood and Thunder bands. When you see one band coming up a road and we're going down it, you see it's all bang into each other. To see who's the best band, you see who's the loudest.
Why do you call yourselves Blood and Thunder?
Well, noise. Noise, that's what it is. Noise and aggression. Trying to do now is to get this wee band here to be the best, better than the two of us already in, and that's what we're going to try and do. Little parades at the workshop in the 12th. That's the big one. Every kid's dream is to walk down in the Belfast Walk, and again you see all the happy smiling faces and the things that you get up. It's brilliant. It's just real good, you know. The lodgemen themselves, when they're walking behind you, are walking proud, you know. But without Blood and Thunder bands, I don't think it's much good, you know.
Young bandsmen are taken to one side by experienced fluters after the main practice. The William McCulloch Blood and Thunder Band is starting from scratch, young fingers getting a grip on tunes familiar for generations in areas like the Shankill.
It was a natural thing to do. The working class streets of North Belfast in those days were full of fluters. The reject fluters alone could have formed 3 bands for every single band that was actually on the road. I mean, I sat in school beside a guy called Flack, whose father was a famous flute tutor. Indeed, I think he taught James Galway in his time. And I was only 10, 11 and 12, and I could have spelt Tchaikovsky when I was 10 years of age, because Flack, this John Flack, the guy beside me, was a fluter. Fluters were everywhere. I think that the kids were drawn to the flute band originally as a means of passing the time. There was a certain amount of status with it too if you were chosen to march on the street with the full uniform and everything else. This was worth going for as well. But it was originally a way to pass the time. B, it was well knitted into the soul to the community.
The bands really emerged, these youthful bands with largely working class composition, emerged really in the mid-1970s at the time of the Loyalist workers' strike. And I think they allowed an opportunity for young people to involve themselves in the fringes of politics and to engage in a variety of displays. And indeed, I think many of the young people are quite cynical about even the political leadership to do with the traditional unionist political issues. They see effectively a period of 16 to 17 years with very little resolution of the political situation.
Further down the Shankill, the bandsmen arrive for practice night with an established flute band. The Shankill defenders play melody, not blood and thunder, an important distinction in the traditional hierarchy of Loyalist bands. These melody bandsmen are concerned with the overall sound, not just the volume of it, and they can afford to be choosy about admitting new members.
To join this band here, there was a waiting list. I have a name down for a lot of ones, and the other band I was in broke up, so I got the chance.
Is it primarily the music that's the attraction?
It's a crack with all the boys and the band's out. We have different things, football matches, dart matches. It's just good fun, like, you know.
Hey, it's just not a matter of coming down here for an hour, or an hour and a half, or 2 hours on a Monday night. There's an awful lot of work taken into running and organising the band.
Do you see the bands, I mean, you mentioned that it's a tradition, do you see these bands as being a way of really maintaining traditions as well as a sort of social club, if you like?
Yes, it does, yes.
How does that actually work?
Well, as I say, when you're a kid, you was kick this and kick the other, and the size, and you just come up like that, stick with it.
Do you think that's still very strong? Because I mean, the Shankill is an area which has changed a lot in the last few years, hasn't it?
Oh, but it's still very strong on the Shankill itself, although admittedly there isn't much left of it. But you go off the main road and you go in through the wee side streets and down around new houses. I'd say it's still very strong. All you have to do is look about and see all the paintings, drawings and different things like that. So I don't think it's really changed that much over the years.
So it's no doubt that there is a political aspect to bands like this. Do you see that as being important in any way?
I don't think our
Not as far as
bonds
politics goes, no.
our bonds interested in politics at all. Actually.
But if we're saying that, and on the other hand, if they call a rally at the City Hall on Saturday, we'll be there if we can get a band out. No, it's just as simple as that.
Laurie Johnson used to be a Shankill fluter. Now, like James Galway, he's a professional flautist, at home with modern, classical and traditional music and based in England. But his roots are in the melody and blood and thunder traditions of the Shankill.
When you take sort of flute bands or accordion bands or whatever, a bit beyond the sort of blood and thunder level, you're basically talking about a working man's orchestra. That's where they learn all about the classical symphonies and the great overtures, and it would surprise you the amount of people that you would meet in Belfast who could whistle you complete overtures, marches, symphonies, what have you.
You mentioned the blood and thunder bands. What view would you take of them?
Probably pretty much a mixed view. I suppose in some instances the present troubles would be responsible for the emergence of some of them, but not always. I mean, it's also a social thing in the sense that it gets people together. Get a guy out of the house maybe a couple of nights a week and away from the wife and kids, and if there's a wee trip somewhere the weekend, it's a day out. Not exactly my cup of tea, but having said that, a lot of my friends play in this sort of band, and they're decent enough fellas.
But today the Shankill's a changed place, bulldozed, redesigned, redeveloped. It's lost much of its population but remains staunchly loyalist. The murals are still defiant, but life no longer offers young people Protestant privilege the way it once did.
This is a generation, whose birth coincided with the Troubles. It's a generation who's now living through a period of mass unemployment. The jobs that in the past were there for young Protestants, skilled jobs, are no longer there. Many of them feel that the connection with the British state is weakening. Not only is the unemployment worrying them, the political future is worrying, and that leads to, I think, a high degree of alienation, which the bands, in their own peculiar way, attempt to address, I think.
Sam Ferguson is joint chairman of the United Ulster Bands Association, which claims a membership of 140 bands across Northern Ireland. The new William McCulloch Band is affiliated, and the time has come to dedicate its colours, a way of christening the band.
Fellas out of the band approached, well, before the band actually started, they approached the Ulster Defence Association. One of our members were killed about 4 to 5 years ago, a fellow called William McCulloch, and they asked the UDA could carry their colours and his name to make the band up. And the Ulster Defence Association agreed to it, and his wife agreed to it, so they just went ahead. But you don't have to be a member of the Ulster Defence Association to be in the band.
The dedication underlines the link between some flute bands and the Loyalist paramilitaries. A UDA colour party marches in the band's flags. The party didn't wish to be identified. Once the new colour party of bandsmen has assembled, William McCulloch's widow presents the new band with the colours, 4 UDA flags. Many people would say, looking in at the outside, that a Blood and Thunder band is just a political front, something which has close links to the paramilitaries and is out to cause confrontation. What part do you think the politics play in this band?
Well, to me, politics, paramilitaries and bands just don't mix as far as I'm concerned. It's the bands go out and do with their own thing. I'm not saying they're not represented by flags and things like that, but there's no say in bands, what bands do or what bands play, or how bands get on.
I would say 80% of this band's not UDA. You don't have to be a UDA member to join this band. And you don't become a UDA member if you do join it.
Quite a number of our younger people in the organisation certainly would go into flute bands. It's sort of understandable. It's an expression, and thankfully it's a non-violent expression of they see that they have to identify themselves as loyalists, identify themselves as not Irish nationalists, and identify themselves as wanting to keep the sort of loyalist tradition going.
But the UDA actually, at least partly, sponsors some of the new Blood and Thunder bands.
Well, if bands, and not only bands, I mean, there are quite a number of things within the community that we do sponsor that have nothing to do with sort of upfront, big badge loyalism.
But you readily admit that the UDA is involved in sponsoring Blood and Thunder bands. Is there a policy?
Sorry, at this point, not just Blood and Thunder bands, any bands which in local areas would perhaps approach people in the UDA to help them with sponsorship. We see it as part of the whole sort of working class Protestant tradition.
So you have taken a policy decision to finance bands where and when possible?
Yes, but not on a very, I mean, it's not very prominent, it's not a very big thing.
Well, I think what the bands do partly address is what could be called the question of Ulster identity, Protestant identity. Many of these young people clearly are living through a time of tremendous political upheaval, and the link with Britain is put into question, not least, of course, by loyalists themselves through the character of the political protests. They live in a community where, of course, young Catholics have a very clear Irish identity. I think that abrasive relationship with young Catholics leads them to question, their own identity. I think the bands do address that.
Ulster identity is particularly important for some of the audience at the dedication, some of whom live just a few yards from a peace line in West Belfast. The Spring Martin estate is full of families rehoused after the Shankill was redeveloped. Now, on the edge of the city, they still look at the Shankill as their heartland, and they also look at a 20-foot wall built to separate them from the Catholic neighbours they've never met. On a cold, wet Saturday morning, the Moorhead Macoubrey Memorial Blood and Thunder Band gathers at the youth club on the estate to march to the Shankill Road. It's the first band competition of the season.
Some of them say it's a kick a Pope band, but it's not just an ordinary, it's an unpolitical band. And we play all sorts of tunes like any other band plays them.
So would you class yourself as being a melody or a Blood and Thunder band?
Well, I'd say we were both melody and Blood and Thunder, but mostly Blood and Thunder.
My point of view, I think people go out to watch the bands. Some people go out to watch the Orange Band, but I think, for instance, the 12th day, if there was no bands, I don't think you'd get the crowds down to watch them.
I think the bands are alright where they are. Don't go out to start trouble, it's just it breaks out, there's nothing else you can do. Only join in.
Just before the band moves off, the police and army escort moves in. In recent years, they've become the essential outriders for any parade along the peace line.
Is there anybody on the other side?
The corner of the wall or spring mark.
We are defensive people. Our politics, our whole way of living has been defensive for a very long time. And parades and through the Orange Order, the Apprentice Boys, flute bands, all sorts of bands, we're marking out the territory every year that this is still part of Northern Ireland, that this hasn't been lost to Irish nationalism.
When the band reaches the Shankill Road, they're on home territory, beating down the high street of loyalism. Robert McCartney, a leading unionist politician, was born into the heart of the area. He too sees flute bands as an embattled reaction by loyalists.
I think it is an expression, an increasing expression of frustration, of the inability through other means, either politically or constitutionally, to express themselves. And in a way, it's marking out the political as well as the physical territory and saying, here we are, these are the badges with which we wish to identify ourselves, and, you know, if you obstruct us, then we are together. They're not quite certain what they wish to do together or what their objective is, but they are at least letting people know that there are substantial numbers who are together.
At the competition, the organisers expected 50 bands, but with the Grand National and Rangers playing Celtic, only 4 have turned up. But those bands who have made it, like the Carrickfergus Ulster Defenders, displayed plenty of the traditional noise and aggression.
It's worthwhile saying that the majority of these parades occur perfectly peacefully. Perhaps over 2,000 of them in only one season, and the majority of these parades occur within loyalist areas where the young people are really speaking to themselves in the first instance, and their display, vociferous as it may be, is largely to their own supporters rather than to groups outside. Indeed, when they are displaying this way, much of the expression of this hostility is attempting to secure unity and compliance amongst the Protestant population rather than directed, I think, primarily against their Catholic neighbours.
Catholic neighbours would disagree. Will Glendinning has experiences of both sides of the community in West Belfast as a councillor.
It's very often not the big occasions which really threaten them. It is the small band parades where 1 or 2 local bands are marching, where followers get hyped up by the band and by the activities, and either at the time of the parade or afterwards, when they have probably had several drinks as well, stone throwing, etc. occurs and problems occur across the sectarian divide.
The bands use the main routes into the city on parades, and albeit that on some of those main routes there is now, as you describe it, a Roman Catholic community. We do not seek to offend those people, but as far as bands are concerned, it is part of our Ulster culture, the Orange institution, and the tradition of the tunes that you refer to. And I think they should accept that as part of our culture, as we accept part of their culture at various times of the year in their own way.
The nationalist side of the community see it as a threat, see it as a means of attack on them, and they are very frightened by these particular bands. I mean, previous to being called Blood and Thunder bands, they were called Kick the Pope band.
Anxiety in nationalist areas at the coming marching season is matched by concern on the part of the authorities, and in the Orange Order there's disquiet. The Order needs bands to add colour and spectacle to parades, and the bands need traditional outings like the 12th. But violence in recent years in places like Portadown and Keady has strained that relationship. The Grand Orange Lodge of Ireland has published what it calls a band contract with strict rules for the coming marching season. Drink is banned at parades and on transport to them. Shouting in an unseemly manner is prohibited. Dancing and twin drumming are banned on parades. And bands can only carry flags approved by parade marshals. How would the Orange Order react to UDA flags being carried in parades?
Well now, if the UDA hold a parade in Belfast, they would not take kindly to the Orange Order flags being carried in that parade. And so similarly, we would say that the 12th of July and other Orange parades are traditional Orange parades, and we would ask the bands to remember this when they do parade.
Some of the contract, like, a lot of fellas don't really see much sense in it, you know.
In what way?
It's just rules that don't really mean anything. The fellas who's out in parade they're not really breaking any laws with playing double drumming and things like that.
Do you not accept that perhaps the Orange Order could be putting these Blood and Thunder bands in an invidious position, in the sense you're asking them to, or inviting them to take part in parades, these loud, very exuberant bands, and then saying, hold it, you know, let's be dignified. It's very difficult for them to follow the letter of the law like that.
Not really. They know the standard that is expected of them when they're parading with the Orange institution. And as I say, if they act sensibly, they have nothing to fear from the contract.
What do you think of their band's contract?
I don't think very much of it, and I don't think I'm going to implicate our band into saying the contract to give any member of the Orange Order a say in the band.
So you won't be following it?
Under no circumstances.
Well, I think the Orange Order for quite a number of years now has been through a phase of trying to make the organisation sort of more religious rather than being seen as a loyalist organisation. They have introduced a contract asking bands to adhere to certain rules, which many of, in fact, of the grassroots Orange Order members are opposed to.
Always the Orange Order was a stickler for dignified behaviour on parade. They wanted everything to go well. Now, today they're just the same. They're even putting their instructions in writing, but the Order has never changed in this regard. What has changed is the young men who make up so many of these Blood and Thunder bands, as they're called. The days whenever they had respect for organisations like the Orange Order are over. They have seen, whether they think about it coherently or not, but they have seen from the workers' strike of '74 and the less successful one after that and various other occasions, that when the chips are down, the UDA will take over the Orange Hall.
Well, I don't think that the Orange Order would accept that it has been a form of political expression. The Orange Order has a principle that it is formed to defend the principles of the Reformed religion. In order to do that effectively, it had to, of course, extend its influence into the political scene. But its primary purpose was a religious one, and it has always been a conservative organisation, and despite myths to the contrary, it has always been a very stabilising and law-abiding institution. And I think it has also been put to the test, because impossible requirements are being made of the Orange Order, as I believe impossible requirements are being made of the RUC.
Last year there were 2,000 parades. 90% involved Protestant bands, and most of them passed off peacefully. But this year, any troublemakers face both the Orange contract and the new public order laws. Bands must give earlier warning of parades, and ultimately they could be forced to register themselves. They'll be under public scrutiny as never before.
This year, probably the Public Order Act, the new Public Order Act, will be the tactic identified and to focus opposition to the Anglo-Irish agreement on. I think that with the frustration, the anger, the total opposition among unionists and the Loyalist community to the agreement, it's quite likely, and I want to make it plain that I'm not advocating this, but I believe that it's quite likely that this anger and frustration will vent itself through confrontation over the Public Order Act.
But here's the Orange Order saying, surely the time has come now to keep our parades as dignified as we can, to tone things down, to avoid confrontation. And you turning around and saying, you don't agree with that.
No, I didn't say, and I certainly don't support the idea of using bans or the Orange Order for confrontation. I think I have said that, particularly a lot of the bans I know, they want discipline, they want rules, they want order, and they want to cooperate with the Orange Order.
As far as the coming marching season is concerned, the bands know exactly the requirements as far as we are concerned. We are going ahead to organise our traditional marches throughout the season. And I firmly believe that with good sense on all sides, we will be able to continue through our marching season without problems.
This is why more bands are starting up. You see, kids are sort of rebelling against it, you know, and the more bands that start, the more awkward it's going to be for the rerouting of the parades, you know. It's going to cause a bit of aggro, I suppose. But hopefully, like, everything will sort itself out, and they'll let the bands go on and do their work. There's no harm in coming to anything if I let them just do it in peace. That's the way I look at it.